Welcome to the Noodle Podcast. We are Kate and Max, and we love noodling on what we've learned by accident. This podcast is a space where we share how we get the best out of ourselves and the people we've worked with. In today's episode, we noodle on what culture at work is really about. Why is a good operating climate necessary? What can you do to influence it? And what is not okay?
Hello.
Hello, Kate.
Today
Yes?
we are going to talk about culture.
Or climate?
Or climate.
Or
yes.
conditions? Or environment? Team spirit?
All those things that indicate what's it like to work around here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how do you know? What are the signs of how people feel when they come to work? And how might you be able to influence that?
Do you need to influence that? Are you even aware of what you are swimming in? That thing where the fish doesn't notice the water and we don't notice the air, but it's around us.
Deep.
Just like a little light topic, just
I
to
thought it'd be
skip through
good.
for 15 minutes. Come on.
15 minutes, yes. 15 minutes, so.
Snappy.
I thought we should share some of the I thought we should share some of the experiences we've had of different cultures that we've worked in.
Okay.
And also people who we know who have been responsible for culture, which is tricky, isn't it? How can one person be responsible? So I worked somewhere where a CEO came in. It's a very big organisation. This CEO said, I don't believe in culture. I don't believe in culture. I don't want to hear the word culture. Nobody talk to me about culture. Everyone's responsible for themselves, for doing the work that they need to do. Culture is not a thing. The team that I worked in was kind of responsible for culture. This is bad news. The business started to tank. I don't think that was the only reason why.
No.
But it didn't help. New CEO came in and said, do you know what I think we need? We need a head of culture. And things shifted. So I've spoken to that person who was head of culture about their experiences. I'll bring that in later.
Okay. But you're right, it's something that whether you pay attention to it or don't pay attention to it, it's definitely a factor. You can't avoid it. And so if you are a manager, you need to attend to what's the organisational culture, but also what's your team's culture.
Yeah.
But before we work out how to do that, how about some stories?
Yes. What's the best culture you've ever worked in?
Best culture. So I've worked in a couple of places when I think back to team dynamics and environments. So one where I worked for an insurance company where there was just a real can-do attitude. And every time I went to see my boss, he was just pleased to see me and was really challenging me to just be creative, be different. And I guess I sort of transport that fast forward to another environment, also in banking, actually. I say strangely, with a slight tone to my voice, but working for this lovely woman who was only ever interested in solutions, even when there were problems. And I don't mean that in a, just give me the solution. I mean, every time we hit a bump in the road, the focus was, how do we find our way out? What are the different options? Not who to blame, how do we fix it, who's going to take the responsibility for this, but the positive future-oriented outlook. What about you?
That sounds really nice. I can see how that would set the tone for how other people would go, oh, that's what we do around here. So those unwritten ground rules, there's a book about that, isn't it? We'll mention it in the blurb. But what do people really do and say around here? There's the espoused values.
Yes.
And again, yes, I've worked somewhere where the values were very, very clear. These are the 5 company values. They were on every wall. They were huge posters up in the reception area. These are our values. These are our values. And they were quite nice values, weren't they? They were on the back of the toilet doors. They were by the photocopier.
Don't forget them.
And it really set the tone for people in the wrong way. I think the comms team had done a great job of saying, these are our values. But what hadn't really happened was for it to translate into behaviour and how people were feeling and being treated. There was actually a culture of fear.
Yeah.
So this business needed to be successful. By being successful, they prided themselves on having the best people, which meant every year they would hoik out the bottom 10% of lowest performers. That really makes you concentrate on, am I doing a good job? How am I doing in comparison to other people? If it's me or them, I think I'm going to make them look bad.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing, that is what drove the culture. And also the person at the top had a phrase when they were trying to get people motivated. And he said, we need to execute, 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 which has a double meaning, doesn't it? when you're literally sacking people, 10% of your staff every year for underperforming, that was the culture. It wasn't what was on the posters.
And that
was bad.
language thing makes a massive difference, doesn't it? Because if you listen to the words that people are using in your organisation or in organisations you might have worked in the past, and you think about the language, it really does give you a sense of what it feels like to be there. And so those use of languages that are quite aggressive or war-based language, that sort of thing, that's always a little bit worrying. But the other thing you said just then is really interesting about that measuring thing. So you could be saying customer experience is really important to us, but then driving towards a financial measure. That means that inevitably, if the financial measure is the thing that's rewarded and recognised, then that's going to drive the behaviours.
Yes. Sales, even if we know that this product isn't quite right for the customer, we've got targets to hit. So that's what we'll do. Or we'll make it difficult for the customer to complain or return a product or whatever it might be. Yeah. Measures. So my colleague who's head of culture said if you only use measures of success, that can really be a problem. It can be quite a distractor. If you're wanting to shift the culture from something to something else, you can't be so focused on the data that you miss the main point, which is about what's it like to work here? Can people do their best? And
people can get confused as well. What about if I think back to customer experience, one of my stories, I was responsible for helping to shift the culture around client experience in this particular organisation. And I had a phone call one day from somebody saying, I wonder whether you could help. I've been given your name. Oh, okay. Always good for me. Yeah. Oh, yes, of course I can help. So I need some help around customer experience. Okay, tell me more. So this person starts to tell me that there's issues in the team. They'd like me to come and talk about professionalism. Okay, little alarm bells going off in my head. Professionalism, okay, not quite sure what the difference is. Talk to me about how that links to customer client experience, what's going on here.
I love how you do that. So tell me more about that. What it means is I don't know what's going on here, but there's a problem.
Yeah. So then, okay, dig a bit deeper. What do you mean by professional? Well, some of the behaviours are not really good. Okay, but I could sense that someone was not telling me what I needed to know in order to be able to support. And I'm digging again. Tell me more. What else? And finally, I just said, I think you just need to cut to the chase. I feel like you're not telling me something that I really need to know. What's going on that you don't want to be going on? Well, yeah, we just don't want the sort of managers to be sleeping with the juniors. At that moment, that penny drop, and then we say, okay, and just out of curiosity, what's going on with the person in charge of this
what do
department
they think about
or
this?
division?
What do they say?
Well, they're sleeping with their PA.
Oh, okay.
And here we go. A good example of if leaders are behaving in a certain way, then it gives unwritten ground rule permission that it's okay, this behaviour is acceptable.
Yes.
I mean, that's an extreme example.
I love that you were asked to run a customer experience course for a team where actually the problem was the senior people are having extracurricular activities with the junior people. It's not necessarily a problem, but it sounds like it was there.
I think it was probably an example of similar things, which is you are looking to your leaders to do as best they can to behave in a fashion that supports a great culture, the right conditions.
So what would your advice be in this situation? I'm talking to a chap who is growing his company and he he's a leader by example. He's recruiting based on values. He'd like the culture to be a certain way. It has been a small, harmonious, family-run business. He's working with a couple of people he's worked with for years and years and years. They're bringing in new people because they want to grow. The new people are not operating in the way that he would like. The new people who've landed a new job and are now wanting to prove themselves there's a little bit of prickliness going in. They've not bought into the values. They aren't part of the family. There's a bit of throwing other people under the bus. Yeah, this isn't working quite the way I want it to. Look over there, don't look over here. What do you do if you're really conscious about the culture you want to create, and yet the people you're bringing in either don't know or haven't bought into that yet? How do you address that?
There's a couple of things in there, isn't there? There's one about what's going on anyway in the recruitment process. So what might you be seeing that's exciting you and drawing you to them that means you're not seeing other things? So there's that bit. But I think when people land, it's having a conversation about what's important around here, what's important to us as an organisation, and having the whole, I know it's a well-worn phrase, what does good look like? But what is okay around here and what's not okay around here, and where's the grey area? Because there's always a grey area, isn't there? And having that values-based conversation, because it's all right organisationally having values, but the challenge point is where my personal values in a moment are in conflict.
That's where we've seen it work well, when performance or even just feedback conversations hook into how are you doing what you're doing, not just what are you doing, what are you achieving, have you hit the numbers, but how have you done that? Have you done it by throwing people under the bus? Or have you done it by being collaborative and making people want to work with you? And that level of congeniality, which is a huge sign of what's the culture like.
I think as well, as a management team, leadership team, and I mean, this goes right through all levels where you have responsibility for others, is how are you using those values to make decisions and sharing how you've done that? So like we just had a meeting today, how much were we focused on client? How much did we demonstrate integrity? How much did we do things with innovation, whatever the values are, but asking yourselves on a regular basis, are we doing this? And if not, what else could we do? Means that you're reinforcing it rather than just waiting until the annual review and going, how did Kate do on integrity this year? It's the first time I've mentioned it.
Integrity. I know. Well, so you need clarity, but as you say, it's not always that clear.
No.
The other thing that our friend, the head of culture, said is you want to be careful about the gap between where you are and where you'd like to be. And don't try to address absolutely everything. You're more likely to get resistance the more things you're throwing at people that you're saying they need to change.
Yeah, don't be the culture police.
Culture police.
Well, you can't do that.
Yes.
Exactly. You've got to be realistic, haven't you, about the shift. And I think having conversations about what's difficult about holding these values true, and what do we need to overcome, and understanding how much of that is policy and process and procedure that needs to change in order to align, and how much is actually just in the moment it's quite hard to do. What support do you need to be able to do it?
Yeah, a bit of patience, time, particularly if you're in charge of a super tanker that needs to turn, then you just need to accept there's going to be some points you can hit. Also, things are going to change around you. The world changes as you're on your culture shift programme. Well, maybe you have to shift with that.
I mean, dare I say it, mentioning the COVID word, but that's a good example of what working from home culturally in a lot of organisations was just not even on the radar.
Yeah.
And now it's the absolute flip of that. And you say, okay, so there's a good example that if you're forcing something when an organisation is not ready, but then the context around changes, then you have an opportunity to seize that moment and go, great, we wanted this, let's go with it.
So I think we're firmly in the camp of let's have a head of culture, not let's never talk about culture, it doesn't exist. What does that mean in terms of if you're part of a system that is shifting? What are the sorts of things that you can feel, you can pay attention to and maybe influence? Maybe we've got some of our noodles that we can...
Well, I think there is the gap that you've mentioned. So engagement staircase is a good example of understanding if you are really clear on aspirationally or ambitiously, is that a real word?
Ambitiously. Let's do that.
What are you aiming for? If you're really clear what you're aiming for and that there's a gap, how do you help people on the journey rather than trying to yank them
or
up
shout at them?
Yes.
Over here. This is where we're going.
Stop doing that. Do more of this.
Yes.
That's not particular.
That is a really good one.
So that's a good one about just helping people on that journey. And that sounds slightly patronising as well. And I don't mean it to sound like that, but just I always feel that if people can understand it, they'll make their own route through it. Whereas if you're just telling them off.
Yes.
Or showing them an impossible challenge.
Or some posters. Yeah.
So what else?
Values.
Well, yes, of course.
Because sometimes your values aren't the same as the business that you're working for. If you're all about equality and fairness and you're working for an organisation that's about win at all costs, it might not quite gel. So even having that insight or conversation can be helpful. Values is a good one.
We've mentioned unwritten ground rules. I think that whole sense of understanding what are the things that people do around here that I didn't get told in induction, but everybody does, and some examples are good, some are, so things like if someone asks you for help, you support them. That would be a good example. And a less example might be turning up late to meetings might be an okay thing to do.
Yeah.
You're suddenly turning up on time and everyone arrives 10 minutes after the start of the meeting. Unwritten ground rule. It's okay to be late.
Yeah. I think there was one more that I wanted to say, which is around the trust equation. Which culturally, it might be that you pay attention to the words that are said and the things that are done, but maybe you don't feel safe enough to show where there might be some vulnerability. But in that is where we build trust, is recognising, what's important to you is also important to me.
Yes.
Or there's something else I should be aware of that's going on for you. Or how much attention are you paying to what's important to me? All of those things. I think culture comes into how safe do we feel? Yes. This is my trust equations in there.
My Petri dish. How do you create the conditions in your team that make it safe, enjoyable, fun? Because it needs to be fun, because you get the best work out of people when it's fun. And when people want to give their discretionary effort when needed. Not all the time, but if you needed to call on the team or they needed to call on you, you'd be prepared to go there because the dynamics that exist in the team were good, were positive.
Yeah. I think it's lovely to think about what's the best culture you've ever worked in and what's the worst and which bits of those can you take or discard.
Yeah.
Because everyone does have an ability to do that a bit with the circle in which they work.
Oh, yes, completely. And you have that interface, don't you, between the team you work in and then the department or division, if you're a large organisation, and then, that wider bit. There's differences and you do notice it.
Another great topic. I'm really loving doing this. Okay, so next time we've got even more big, hairy, audacious things to cover. And again, if anybody wants to get in touch with us and share their stories, particularly around climate that you're working in, you can be anonymous if you want to be. If you need to be.
Just some corkers. I just want to know whether anyone can top my client experience, don't sleep with juniors story. Answers on a postcard. You can find a reminder of the concepts and noodles we've mentioned in this episode's blurb and get daily snippets on Instagram at noodle_space. Don't forget to subscribe, share and leave us a review. We love hearing your stories too on the chat at www.noodle.space.